Okay, go.
Okay, hello. Welcome to Unite Planet. It's quite a special interview today. We're going live, of course, but it will be recorded and then posted up an edited version on Unite Planet's YouTube channel. We're very happy to have with us Anthony Peake, which we've had the pleasure of interviewing Anthony Peake a couple of times, visiting in his home. I think, when was that? A couple of years ago, I think it was, a few years ago now.
About 3-4 years now, because it was before all the lockdown stuff.
Yeah, I think it was. It was probably, see, time goes so fast, time. Yeah, illusion of time. But it's brilliant to have Anthony Peake with us today. And we're going to be discussing, of course, his latest book, Cheating the Ferryman. It's been out, I think, last year it came out, Anthony. It was.
Yeah, it did. Yes, it did. In fact, June, July last year.
Yeah. So we'll be the aspects of that book, of course, and just parts of Anthony's life and his work surrounding his hypothesis, the Cheating the Ferryman hypothesis. Would be. It's going to be a great talk. So I'm going to bring in Anthony now, just to start off. I suppose to kick off, I'd just like to start in. What triggered you to make a sequel of it's live TV, folks.
The black cat. The
Yes.
black cat. If the black cat appears, that means
Yes.
things. Absolutely. It's
does,
symbolic.
yes.
It's symbolic. Especially as you have black cats all around you.
Yeah.
Let's just hope you don't get a black elephant. Because if we get
I
that,
hope
we've
not.
got a problem.
I really hope not, Anthony. Anyway, yes, if we could just ask, bring into what triggered you to make this, write the sequel? Was it just the evidence was piling up to a point where you thought a sequel was now, a relevant part? Could you bring us into?
Yeah. I mean, I'd always wanted to think. I was always thinking about writing a sequel to Is There Life After Death? But the reason I did it was that I first wrote it over 20 years ago. So the original version of Is There Life After Death? The Extraordinary Science of What Happens When We Die was going to be called Cheating the Ferryman. And the only reason it wasn't called Cheating the Ferryman was that my publisher, in their infinite wisdom, thought that people wouldn't understand the nuance of it. And they said, let's call it Is There Life After Death? The Extraordinary Science of What Happens When We Die. And I thought, well, this is cool because I don't talk about what happens when we die anyway. So that's misleading in the first place. And a lot of people who read the book said that to me, and they said, but you don't talk about what happens after you die. You leave that open. And that's always been my approach, that I don't know what happens after you die. I've no idea. I've never been there. So what I wanted to do was I wrote in the first book. But then in that 20-year period, I've learned so much more. It doesn't mean that the overall hypothesis has changed. But what it means is that I have more information now that I can use to back up the hypothesis. Now, it is of profound importance to understand that I'm not saying that Cheating the Ferryman is right. All I'm turning around and saying is that the evidence, if you take the evidence on face value, you take the science and you take the experiences of people, it seems to point in that direction. It's not that I really always make this point very strongly. When I came up with Cheating the Ferryman, I didn't have an idea. And I thought, this is an idea of potential human immortality. Go out and find the information for it. It didn't happen like that. I started up with just wanting to understand déjà vu. Literally, that was my starting point, was what the hell is déjà vu? Because I'm a classic migrainer. And one of the things I have before my migraine attacks is an aura state. And in that aura state, I have profound déjà vu sensations. And it had always intrigued me because I thought, well, what does this mean? What exactly is déjà vu? Is it just, as they say, it's a neurological thing? Robert Efron in 1961 came out with his model called the visual pathways hypothesis. Is it one part of the brain processing visual information before the other? And that's how I started. And I've always used the analysis and the analogy here that I felt when I was writing the first book that I was being guided. I felt that there was a part of me that was pointing me in the right direction, as if there was something tapping me on the shoulder and go over there or follow that. But I didn't know It was like I was wandering in a forest and there was a path and something had tapped me on the shoulder and go down there. And books were supplied to me and ideas seemed to come to me in my sleep and I was pulling it together. And I've used the analogy, it was like there was a guy called Friedrich Schliemann, who was a German archaeologist in the 19th century. And Schliemann had always been interested in the legend of Troy and the Iliad, Homer's Iliad, and the story of the siege of Troy. But it was in that time, it was only legend. It was not believed by anybody. But Schliemann thought, I wonder if there's something more to this legend. And what he did was he did some research and he took himself off to the Aegean coast in Turkey. And his daemon, his guide or whatever it was, led him to this hill in near Kanakkale in the northern Aegean Turkish coast. And it was called the Hill of Hisarlik. And what he did was he began digging into the hill of Hisarlik. And as he did so, he started to excavate and he found a city. And he dug through that city and he found another city and another city. And I think in the end, he found 7 different levels of city. And he realized it was Troy. And I think it was the last city he found had been burned, or one of them had been burned. And he realized that the legend was true, that there really was a Troy. And I feel with my writings that what it was I was excavating information. I wasn't being led. I was being led, yes, but I wasn't trying to prove anything. And I've always argued as well that my book and my books and my hypotheses, they're not mine. I haven't invented these. You know, people come around to me and they say, I really don't like Cheating the Ferryman and what it implies, as if I'm trying to invent it, as if I'm trying to say, this is what I believe is true. When in point of fact, there's a lot of elements of Cheating the Ferryman I don't like. But as I say to other people, you know, I don't like the existence of cancer. I don't like, there's lots of things in the world I don't like, but they're still there. And just because I don't like them isn't going to make them go away. I don't like the idea, for instance, of the idea that we just have one life and we're born and we die. And, you know, the idea that, well, you know, you didn't exist for billions of years. Then something comes into existence for an infinitesimal small amount of time and then disappears again. I don't like that either. But that if you're a materialist reductionist, that's what you believe. That is it. That is you. You're just a pointless link in a genetic chain. I don't like that. You know, so to say you don't like Cheating the Ferryman is crazy. So that is basically why I decided that I'd write the Cheating the Ferryman book now, because I'd pull together all the science, all the people I'd interviewed, meeting guys like yourselves, and I'd pull that all together because I felt that there was a much bigger hypothesis here than was first pointed out in the book that came out in 2006.
I mean, the one thing that as well that I know you've struggled with as well is the conventional science as well. And I mean, one aspect, I know you've spoken about it before, but I was thinking, you know, the Robert Lanza with his biocentrism.
Yeah,
he's pretty much nicked your idea, you know, put it in layman's terms, you know. And I've read biocentrism and I've read Is There Life After Death, and the parallels are, it's, you know, so that must be pretty frustrating for yourself, really.
It drives me crazy. Did Robert Lanza steal my ideas? No, of course he didn't.
Yes, yeah.
Robert Lanza, my book came out in 2006, and I'd been researching it since the mid-1990s. Robert Lanza's book came out, I think, in 2009. But what drives me crazy is that if you read what Robert Lanza says about himself, and if you read the reviews of biocentrism, he's an absolute genius. He's an absolute original. It's a completely original idea. Nobody's ever thought of anything like this. And people were actually putting him forward and saying, this guy is so brilliant, he should get a Nobel Prize for physics. And I'm standing there going, hold on a minute, you know, with all due respect, I came out with this first, and my concept is deeper and far wider than Lanza even tries to approach. Now, when I first read biocentrism, I thought, great, wonderful. Somebody else coming up with the same idea. It's the idea of the zeitgeist. It's the idea these ideas are going to be blooming up everywhere. So I contact Robert Lanza. I emailed him and I said, "Hi, Robert, really great to hear from you. I've written, heard about your book. I've written a book that's very, very similar. We're really great to be in touch." He just shunned me, cut me, didn't want to know. I then thought, no, maybe he didn't get the message. So I emailed him again and he still didn't want to know. And my question is, why will Robert Lanza not engage with me? And he won't engage with me because if he's checked out my book, he knows that my hypothesis is far, far more powerful than the wonderful, totally original, unique biocentrism. And yes, it annoys me. It annoys me that there are other writers that are coming along now that are writing tiny sections of what I've been writing about over my 12 books, just small sections of it. And the world is going, wow, this is great. Yeah. Only I've already done it. My philosophy is, I think, that I'm so far ahead of the curve that nobody can see me. I've already done it all, and I'm out of sight. And everybody's going, oh, we can't see Anthony Peake, but let's do this. And I do find that there are a lot of organizations that really are ill at ease about me. They don't really. They kind of know about me and they'll kind of vaguely acknowledge me, but they really don't want to know. And the reason they don't want to know is they want to keep bringing out their books going, let's just bring out books that have got lots of analogies, lots of experiences, but we want a mystery. I'm going, I think I've already got it, guys. I think, just, can you listen to me? And so far they don't. But what I will say is that the movement of my readers and the people that are interested in my work is getting stronger and stronger and stronger, and the groundswell is really building up at the moment. And they can't ignore me for much longer. They probably will, but they can't really ignore me for much longer.
I agree. I can, we sense the swell of the appreciation for your work as well. It has to overflow at some point, but I just feel sometimes that there's a restrictiveness within the science community that's not allowing you to get, and so because you don't fit their kind of what their perceptions of, and I suppose mainstream itself, you don't fit the perception of what they think.
Yeah, the problem is, and I've said this on many occasions, is that people turn around to me and say, how can you write about quantum mechanics? How can you write about quantum physics? How can you write about biochemistry? How can you write about neurochemistry? What cosmology, what qualifies you to write about all these subjects? And my counter argument here is, what qualifies anybody? You tell me anybody that's got PhDs in all those subjects. They haven't. And my argument is that, it's only by being an eclectic reader with a rigid academic background. People forget this, that I have degrees. I have university degrees. I studied postgraduate at the London School of Economics. I have been offered, I think, on 3 occasions, 3 PhDs on the background of my work, three PhD programs. Yeah, I could do a PhD program at a proper university if I wanted to, on the theory, on the background. Other institutions have offered me PhDs by publication on the back of the work I've already done. Yeah. But to me, it's not that. That's not what I'm after. I don't particularly want to be Dr. Peake. It's not that important to me. What is important is getting the ideas out there. Now, the issue with my work is that because it is so broad, I discuss everything from Gnosticism to Vedanta to the Kabbalah to quantum physics to the Heisenberg's uncertainty principle to cosmology to black holes. There isn't, and I stand corrected here, but I'm pretty damn sure there's nobody else on the planet doing that. I'm pretty damn sure, but I don't know.
I view it more as that, you don't suffer the, I suppose, the restriction of science. You're more of a free thinker, which allows you then to be more broad and bringing the evidence abroad, which I always follow those kind of, which is why I follow you, is because, and there's hardly any of you with your work. There's only you, really. And to bring, I suppose, the irony of it, the way I look at it is that, within us all, we have the mystery people like to think that we have all the mysteries of life. They like that, like you mentioned before, the mystery of life and death. It's like, people like to think, oh, we're not meant to know that. We're not meant to know that, as if it's some kind of spiritual kind of information we've got. But I feel that we've all got the instruments within us to learn the mysteries of life. And I think what's with you, this is my own interpretation, that you've allowed, you kind of opened up to that, and your daemon is guiding you to the art. That's what I feel, that it's guiding you to these, like you say, with the books that come into your life and things that come into your life to add to
I think you're quite right. You've hit the nail on the head there. There is materialist reductionism is the most powerful form of science we know, and people criticize and say, materialist reductionists, they're clueless. They're not clueless at all. We could not be doing what we're doing now without material reductionism. The idea that you understand how something works by literally breaking it down into its component parts. You reduce material. That's what materialist reduction is about. And by breaking that down, you can understand how things work. So, you see a car, you break it down into its component parts, and you realize it works with an internal combustion engine and it's expanding gases, and that's how it works. That's great, and it works really, really well. But what it doesn't work is for consciousness. It does not work for how inanimate matter reacting with electricity inside the brain creates self-motivated individual consciousnesses that have hopes and fears and memories and everything else. And there is this kind of vague embarrassment in science. David Chalmers in, I think, 1997, 98, came up with the concept at the University of Arizona when he stood up and made a speech and said, there are two problems with science. There's the soft problem of science, which is how the brain functions, and there's the hard problem of science, how the brain creates consciousness. And we're still no further down the road there. I see very weird books. I mean, I keep myself very up to date in terms of the writings of materialist reductionist writers and philosophers and everything else as well. So I'm aware of the arguments that are being used here. And, every few years, a book will come out where somebody will be claiming, I understand what consciousness explained. Daniel Dennett many years ago, talk about hubris, consciousness explained, and he doesn't, because it's almost like how many angels are dancing on the head of a pin. There's this huge logical leap you have to make, that chemicals coming together, when you break down chemicals, they are atoms, they are subatomic particles reacting with each other, which creates me and creates me looking at a sunset now out through the window. We don't know how that works. And there's an embarrassment because science can't explain it. So they pretend they do. They pretend that it's called promissory materialism. The idea is, because we can't understand qualia at the moment, because we don't understand why 94% of the universe is missing, we don't know it now, but in the future we will. It's like a promissory note you have. In other words, they say, well, we don't know now. And what we're doing is we're continuing along the same furrow of using what we've understood now to explain what we think is going to be in the future. And I've argued we've gone off on a tangent. We've gone off on the wrong path. We've got to realize that our science isn't full and it isn't total. And the only way we're ever going to do that is to start acknowledging that there is something more than the physical universe that's around us, that there is something else that impinges onto this physical world that can explain things in one way or another. And until we start to acknowledge that, I'm reminded here of a very famous speech that Michelson of the Michelson-Morley experiment made, again, I think about 1894, when he was opening up a new center at the University of Chicago. And he stood up and he said, as far as the future is concerned and science, he said, we're almost there. Our science can explain virtually everything. The only thing there are only 2 or 3 dark clouds on the horizon. And he said, and these dark clouds are the ultraviolet catastrophe, the photoelectric effect. And there was another one, which I'm trying to remember what the third one was. And they said, but other than that, science now, science is going to spend its years just calculating to the 6th decimal point the greater knowledge of the universe. Now, what is a really great story here, and I love this one, and I cited it in one of my books. Around just a few years earlier than that, there was a young German student, and he was a very, very good musician. I think he was a pianist. And he couldn't make up his mind whether he wanted to be a pianist or a physicist. So he went to see his professor, and the professor said, well, and he used the same approach. He said, well, we know almost everything about physics. There's little point in being a physicist. Become a musician. You're going to earn more money, and it's going to be much more interesting being a physician. That young man was a guy called Max Planck. And in 1900, Max Planck was employed by the German government to find ways of making light bulbs more effective, because the Germans were being left behind by the Americans and the British with light bulbs. So they set him a task and said, can you start looking into energy and how energy works in order to make light bulbs more effective? And he started researching on it, and he found there were problems with how light functioned, how light worked, how energy worked, how electromagnetic energy worked. And this was what I mentioned before, the ultraviolet catastrophe, which I won't go into details, but the strange thing is that in an act of desperation, this young, he was 40 at the time, Max Planck decided the only way I can make it work is if energy isn't continual, as if energy is not, but it's in little bits or quanta. And energy is not continual. And he stood up in December of 1900 and made a speech in Berlin. And he presented to the scientists this new model. And that's where the quantum world started. And 5 years later, Einstein came up with his great year when he wrote 3 academic papers. And in doing so, he explained the photoelectric effect. And suddenly, the hubris of all these scientists and Michelson and everybody else, within 10 years, the world had changed. But the problem is the vast majority of standard scientists and the vast majority of people out there are only taught the science prior to 1900. They're not taught about quantum mechanics. They're not taught about quantum physics for one very good reason, because it makes no bloody sense. And it doesn't make any sense because we're looking at it completely the wrong way.
Well, I guess it would be because we're so attached to this physical world. It's like we can't let it go. Like, I suppose in the conventional world. So it's almost like I don't know if there's certain groups of people, science groups that are stopping this in getting into the educational system, but or it's just they just don't want to know. They just don't want to bring, because it may impact their own the science.
It's simpler than that, I think. Around about 15 years ago, 2 scientists in California, Bruce Rosenberg and Kuttner, Fred Kuttner, wrote a book together about consciousness. And I think they either called it the Consciousness Revolution or something similar. And it said science approaches consciousness. And when they got that, and the book was published by an academic publisher, and they say in the introduction to the book, and as I say, Bruce Rosenberg was professor of quantum physics at one of the universities in California. I think it was the University of California. And in the introduction to the book, he says, when we wanted to publish this book, there was so much opposition from our fellow scientists, because the analogy was used. They said, you can't tell the general public these things, because it's like giving a child an atom bomb, because they won't know how to understand it, because we don't understand it, which means that our credibility is going to be eroded. And it means people, in many ways, it reminds me of the Protestant, I'm a historian by background. One of my degrees is in history, and I was particularly interested in the Reformation. And of course, the Reformation was the same thing. The Catholic Church said, you can't allow the lay people to read the Bible, because you can't. You've got to have it interpreted by the priests and everybody else, and then they interpret and give the masses the interpretation, because it's so complex, because, you know, it's been translated from Latin, from Aramaic, Greek. It's complex. And the ideas are complex. You can't just give a person that complexity, because they'll reinterpret it. And of course, what happened with the Protestant Reformation was that when Luther came along, and even more with people like Calvin and Zwingli and everybody else, they suddenly said, no, guys, you can read the Bible and you can come to your own conclusions. And of course, what happened after the Protestant Revolution was, whereas Catholicism stayed being a monolithic thing, Protestantism started breaking off into sects and different religious groups, Seventh-day Adventists, the Mormons. They were all interpreting their own interpretation. And I think this is the genuine fear that science has. The Church of Scientism has the fear that if everybody goes up and they don't fully understand, for instance, and I'll agree with this, if you don't fully understand, and I do try hard to understand at least a degree of the maths involved, you're going to jump to all kinds of conclusions that are not correct. And I see this online all the time. Quantum healing, quantum hypnotism, you know, it's nonsense. It's the snake oil salesman. And they're the ones that damage people like me, because they're the ones that are taking quantum mechanics and turning it into some rubbish nonsense. And this is why the materialist reductionist critics love those people. They love them. They will pull them into the mainstream. They'll have them on TV all the time, whereas they won't have people like me on TV for a good reason, because they can't ridicule me in quite the same way. I'll give a very quick example of this. What happened, I did an event in New York around about 15 years ago. And there was an audience, about 300 people turned up. It was extraordinary, really, really wonderful. And halfway through my talk, this guy stands up and he goes, I believe you're a charlatan. I don't believe you know what you're talking about at all. He said, I think you're talking rubbish. And he said, so I'm going to put you on the spot now. He said, I'm a professor of physics from Princeton. And he said, I want you here and now in front of everybody to explain Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. So I did. And he went, oh, and I said, am I right? And he said, yes. And I said, was there anything in my interpretation there that was wrong? And he said, no. I said, can I talk to you afterwards? He ran away. He ran away. And they do this all the time. They expect that you talk about superposition, you talk about non-locality, and they believe that people like me we've just got a vague idea of the words. I don't use just the words. As far as I can do as a non-mathematician, I do understand. I know the history, I know the background, I know the major players. And to me, I always say to quantum physicists, tell me where I'm wrong. Don't just criticize me and call me a woo-woo. Tell me where I have got it wrong. And they never do. They never do.
I think this is the thing. It's almost like they try and lump you in with those others that are very vague, but then they can't pin you down. That's probably, it's that kind of like the simple term is why they don't like you, because they can't pin you down. They can't kind of like, they can't dismiss you like the rest.
I was invited a few years ago to speak.
You've done the science with it, so.
Well, a few years ago, I was invited to speak at the University of Edinburgh Skeptics Society. And they contacted me and they said, we'd love to have you involved to come and talk to us. A week before the event was about to take place, they backed out. And they backed out because I was told by one of the people that originally instigated the contact was they checked me out. And because they were expecting to have some fun with some woo-woo sky pilot. And they thought, we're going to have fun with this guy. We're going to make him look stupid. We're going to really have fun. And then they thought, maybe we're not going to have so much fun with this guy. Maybe he's going to embarrass us. Maybe we don't quite know as much of the physics as he does. And even if we know the physics, we don't know the neurology. And we don't know the cosmology that he's talking about. Now, again, as you know, in my books, every single thing I say in my books is referred back to academic papers. I do not make statements without supporting them. And as I always say to everybody, please don't take my word for it. Go away, read it yourself and come back to me. and we can talk about it. And if you come up with something that I've said that makes no sense, that's great. I'll change everything and I'll change my position, because I'm like you guys. I'm not a guru. I'm not anybody magical or special. I'm just an enthusiastic person who wants to know what the bloody hell is going on, why I'm here, what's the point of my bloody life, you know. And if everybody else wants to be along for the ride, that's great, you know.
That's brilliant. I mean, I think what's great about this talk at the moment is that we've kind of built up now where you are. We can bring in now the book itself, was like built up that, because so we're going to go. But I mean, I've yet to read it, but I kind of want to know. I can't remember once. I can't read quick to read. It's like I want to know the spoilers, kind of thing. Without giving too much away.
The butler did it. The butler did it.
The book, yeah.
You know, it was him all along.
Yeah.
He was in the background, you know. But I've ruined the book now. Damn. It's odd.
What is is there life after the Cheating the Ferryman? Is the a kind of central theme that kind of links the two together to make it more, I suppose, robust, if that's the right explanation?
Yeah, I guess really the theme that underpins both, but is much more expanded in Cheating the Ferryman, is the true nature of reality. In Cheating the Ferryman, I didn't know as much as I do now about the holographic universe models and about the black holes, information theory, and how it seems that we are living in what, coining the term of somebody I'll be doing a presentation with in California this summer, Dr. Andrew Gallimore. He calls it an instantation. Okay, so that's the first thing, is that. And the other thing is that I'm much more expanded now in terms of the interface between us and external reality. Is external reality a projection of the mind that we project outwards? And I'm particularly interested in this particular area in themes I followed in my book, The Infinite Minefield, where I was very interested in hallucinogenic substances, entheogens like dimethyltryptamine. When people take these substances, what is taking place? Because everybody I know that has done it says they are rocketed into a completely different reality that is more real than this one. So that's the second theme that really I've expanded upon in the new book. And I'm also just interested in something that I discussed in my last book before Cheating the Ferryman, called The Hidden Universe, is what I call the egregorial. And we can touch upon this later, but the egregorial effectively is that when we encounter non-human intelligences, be it UFO encounters, be it encounters with DMT beings, be it the machine elves, all these other things, poltergeists, ghosts, are we co-creating them in some way? Are they using us to bring themselves into existence? In which case then, in the new book, I say that there are different levels of consciousness. Now, remember in Cheating the Ferryman, I say there's the daemon, eidolon, dyad, the idea that, just very quickly, Cheating the Ferryman is when you die, you don't actually die. You fall out of time and you go back to the moment of your birth and you relive your life again. And at the end of that life, you relive it again and again and again. Differently. Every time it's a different life, because your daemon guides you. In other words, your first life, you just live it like a third-person computer game. Like the person playing the game. You start the game, switch the game on, you have an on-screen sprite. That's the being I call the eidolon. And it's living your life. The game is of your life. Your eidolon runs down a corridor, goes into a room, say, and gets eaten by a monster. The eidolon is dead. The eidolon goes back and starts their life again. But this time, the game player the daemon, the being I call the daemon, which is the universal you, the real you, that daemon has the memory of the last life and goes, whoa, in this life, this game, I'm going to make sure that my eidolon doesn't go into that room and get eaten by the monster. So I'll try and guide my eidolon to not do that. And this is why we have inklings and feelings that sometimes we shouldn't do things. Now, I argue that over many games or many lives, our daemon amasses this huge amount of information because it knows the outcome of most of the decisions you can make in your life, because it's testing. Because after many lives, it starts to play games. It starts to think, do you know what? I'll have my eidolon emigrate to America when they're 20 and see what happens. Or I'll have my eidolon marry this girl that he didn't marry last time and see when he has children, what happens there. Now, again, in the new book, we can come into this later, but I do the physics of this. If people are turning around and saying, oh, what a nonsense. It isn't. I do the physics of how this can be. So let's imagine you're living this, we're all living in this computer game, and we live our lives over and over again. Now, in the new book, I argue that there's more than this, and I have to admit this is more hypothetical. But I believe there's the eidolon, which lives one life. Then there's the daemon, which lives all your lives. The daemon effectively is Connors in Groundhog Day. Remember, he lives the same day over and over again. He's a daemon because he's got daemon memory in an eidolonic body. So the eidolonic body is living the same day over and over again, but the daemon has all the memories. Okay, so that's how, maybe there's an analogy that works. But imagine that above the daemon is what I call the uber daemon. And the uber daemon is the equivalent of the collective unconscious. It's the equivalent of the Jungian ideal that we have a collective unconscious of humanity. Now, I argue that the information that's carried there, and in one of my previous books I discussed it, it's DNA. DNA itself carries information, and DNA can encode information. The codons in DNA, the 4 codons of DNA, can be put in any kind of configuration. And they've now been putting information. The last chapter of my last book, I explain how they're now coding information within DNA. DNA is a code, it carries information. And again, if anybody's really interested in this whole DNA thing, there is a book called The Cosmic Serpent, written by Jeremy Narby. And in that book, he argues that the entities the lizards and the snakes that he used to see when he was in DMT, ayahuasca dreams, is in fact an embodiment of DNA. And it's DNA communicating with us, our own DNA communicating with us. So you have this uber daemon, which is the DNA memory of everybody. Now, I think this now explains one of the things that people have problems with Cheating the Ferryman, because people turn around and say, how can Cheating the Ferryman be right? When you die, you go back and live your life again. How do you explain past life memories? How do you explain people when they regress back? How do you explain reincarnation when people, I can. It's what it is. It's that next level of memory. It's the uber daemon memory that's been tapped into. So when you are hypnotized into a past life regression, what happens is the hypnotism allows you to access the Akashic field, the Akashic record, which is effectively, scientifically, the DNA information field. And you attune into that. And what you do is, in hypnotism, I know this from friends of mine who are professional hypnotists and friends of mine who are professional regressionists as well, who agree with me totally, by the way. Even the people who are doing this say, no, your hypothesis works far better from our experiences rather than I'm hypnotizing somebody back into an 18th century body and they're seeing them. What is happening is that the person is desperate to come across well with the hypnotist. This is why certain people can be hypnotized easily, because they're more keen to do this. So when they go into these altered states, when they go into the hypnotic state, they start plowing into their DNA memories and they find something and they see it and they regurgitate it back as if it's their life. Well, it is their life, effectively. It's the life of the collective unconscious of humanity. Because I argue that We are all one consciousness experiencing itself subjectively. So when you go into these altered states, you get into this wider state. Now, again, I'm probably talking an awful lot here, but I'm on a flow. So,
Go, yeah.
okay. So friends of mine that have taken a substance called 5-MeO-DMT, which is the excretions of the Sonarian desert toad. It is much more powerful than DMT. People confuse the two. They are similar, but they're quite different substances. People who take DMT say that you go into this alternate place and you encounter entities and you do all this thing. If you take 5-MeO-DMT, you don't. You have a totally different sensation of oneness. You realize that you are everything. Everything is you, and you are everything. And everything you see and perceive are emanations of you. And you are everybody.
Yeah.
And we are all everybody. There was a very famous science fiction story written 1950s called Let's Be Frank. And that's what it was about. Frank discovers he's everybody. Now, this again goes back to philosophy. It goes back to something called a perennial philosophy of Aldous Huxley. Because this is the great secret of all the great religions, mysticism and everything else. Initially, it's find the God within, which is the daemon. Yeah. And I'll guarantee there are people out there who are into magic. Classic magic will say, yeah, that's exactly what you're doing. You're finding the being inside, the God within yourself. It even says it in the Bible, look within, find the God within, find the Buddha within. So you go into that level and you find the daemon. But then when you go further, you find the Or Ein Sof in Kabbalah, the intelligence that is everything. You discover I think it's in Kashmiri Shaivism, they have a similar problem, similar concept. In Hinduism, they have a concept of Brahman. So the idea is we're all one consciousness experiencing itself subject. So when you go higher levels of consciousness, you then encounter the daemon, then you encounter the uber daemon. Okay. Then above the uber daemon is something I call the godemon. And the godemon is the backdrop of everything. God. But God as it is, God that is everything. This is literally the concept of the Or Ein Sof within Kabbalah, within the Kabbalists. This is the belief system, for instance, in terms of Sufism. Every single religion you bind in to what, as I say, Huxley called the perennial philosophy, you will find the same message. It's identical. We are one consciousness experiencing itself subjectively. So we move up through the levels. So as we do, and by this model, I can explain everything, because it means that when we encounter other entities, when we are in demonic consciousness, when we are in the DMT states, these entities manifest because they're us, and they can use us. They are still independent of us, but they can manifest. Now, again, in my book, I argue that, well, what are they made of? What's the substance? And I went back, and it was interesting. I went back to the Kabbalah because I have one or two friends of mine that are Sufis. And in the Sufis, a few years ago, a Sufi sheikh invited me to speak at a Sufi monastery in northern Cyprus, because they were saying, do you know your science is Sufism? I get other people, I get Kabbalists coming saying, it's Kabbalah. I had a Buddhist monk contact me from Australia to say that I was doing the science of Buddhism. And it's because I am, in a kind of a way. But all I'm doing is finding things that people have known, mystics have known this. So these entities are you, but they're not. Now, in the Quran, I think it's in the Quran. It might be in one of the sayings of the Prophet. I don't know, but it's something, and it's the idea of man. Angels were made of light. Man was made of mud. And beings known as the jinn were made of smokeless fire. Now, I was very intrigued by this concept of smokeless fire. And in fact, I was recently over in Jordan, and I managed to talk to a Sufi guy over there. And I was given a guided tour, a walk at the back of Petra, the places that people don't normally go, and the caves that they don't normally go. And what was really weird about this, and this is how my life works, how peculiar this is. Well, I went into this cave, and this guy took me into this cave, and we were discussing about the smokeless fire principle of the jinn. And I get back, and I'm on Netflix, and somebody says, "Have you seen the Jordanian TV series, The Jinn?" So I went on, and guys, do this. Go onto Netflix, and the opening sequence of this thing about the jinn, they're flying. They have a drone as the opening sequence. A drone is filming, and they're at Petra, and they fly at the back of Petra, and they fly over the bloody cave I went in. I'm going, you can't script this. My life is so weird. And I'm going, of all the caves he could have taken me. So the jinn then a smokeless fire. So does this mean, now again, there is a guy I know, an American writer called Paul Eno. And Paul Eno's written a series. You must interview Paul. He's fascinating. He has his own show in America as well. And he wrote a book called Dancing Past the Graveyard, is one of his books. And he spent his life, he's an ex-Catholic priest who then got kicked out of being a Catholic priest because he wanted to hunt ghosts instead. So him and his Catholic priest, trainee Catholic mates, were in the 1960s and 70s bobbing around New England chasing ghosts. I can imagine them, they're Catholics chasing ghosts. I mean, it's really crazy stuff.
Wow.
But he argues, similar to me, that when he's seen poltergeist activity and when he's seen entities, he's noticed that they tend to gravitate around electrical cables, electromagnetic energy, as if they're using the electromagnetic energy and our anticipations of them to bring themselves into this existence. And how would you define a being that was made out of a particular form of matter called plasma? The sun is made of plasma, for instance. Plasma is a different form of matter. How would you describe plasma? Smokeless fire? This is exactly what plasma is. And what I believe is that we are communicating with ourselves as our higher selves and our greater higher selves. And there's this hierarchy of intelligence that is playing with itself, to coin a phrase. I hope it doesn't go blind, but there was a wonderful point made by, it was an English writer in America in the 1960s, whose name will come to me now. And he was the first person that came up with this brilliant idea about embodiment of God. And he turned around and he said, just imagine if you're God. You are omnipotent, omniscient and everything, and you've lived forever. And you've been in existence forever. What are you going to do? You're going to be bored. You're going to be so bloody bored. It's not true. So what do? You can't create your own simulation, and you populate it with sentient beings, and you watch what they do, and then you think, no, this is boring. I'm just watching what they do. I've got a better idea. What I'll do is I'll embody myself in them and forget who I am. So what I'll do is I'll embody into Jonny Sinclair. And I'll watch Jonny Sinclair's life from the moment of his birth to the moment of his death. And I'll remember all his hopes and fears and the tragedies and the great things of his life. And I'll be inside his head, looking out of his eyes, but I'll make sure I don't remember who I am so that I can really enjoy it. And then I'll be Paul Northridge, and I'll be Paul Northridge for a time. And I'll just do this for all eternity. And I will just pop into aliens' minds and do that. Now, in ancient Greece, there is a term called amnesis. And amnesis in ancient Greek times, when you died, you found yourself in front of the river Styx. And the mists parted and the ferryman came across. Okay. Charon the ferryman. He would take you across the river Styx. And when you got the other side, what is lesser known is in Greek mythology, you were given the opportunity of maybe going back and living your life again. But if you did, you had to drink the waters of the river Lethe. And by drinking the waters of the Lethe, it would wipe all your memories clear. And you'd go taken back, and you'd live your life again. When you were living your life again, there were occasions, if you could drink another water, which is called the water of remembering. from the spring of Mnemosyne, the goddess of memory, and they would bring your memories back again, and you'd remember who you are, and you would remember that you are God embodied within your own body. But initially, you're only going to remember the first thing. You're going to remember, I've done this before. So the first opening of memory is, this is not the first time I've lived this life. And this is what happens in déjà vus. What happens is, it's as if the spring of Mnemosyne is kind of opening your memories, and you're going, oh, I've done this before. I remember this. And then you forget it again. And then it happens again and again. And of course, what I argue in Cheating the Ferryman is that by doing this, we cheat the ferryman. The ferryman never gets his oboli. He never gets paid, because as we become aware of what we really are, and as our levels of consciousness rise up, we realize that we are more. And effectively what happens is a daemon realizes. And when a daemon realizes, it means a daemon can have fun. So he's like the Godemon, but he can only play with one life. Then you get the uber daemon, who can play with the whole of humanity. And then you get the Godemon that can play with all of reality and all sentient beings across the universe. So everything that's out there is not out there. It's an instantation. It's a projection. It's a hologram. And it's embedded into multiple levels, different dimensions of reality. And again, I'm using the term dimension, not in the new age woo-woo way of, we can go into different dimensions. I'm talking literally about the 3 dimensions plus the 4th dimension of time, plus the 5th dimension, which is effectively existing in the Tesseract. And there are other levels. Now, for instance, we know in string theory, there's 12 dimensions of space. And there's more arguments. There's different dimensions of space. And in which case, within these different dimensions, different consciousnesses can exist. So that's basically the hypothesis in the new book, really.
Does it tie in the Uber? What was is this it all in the Cheating the Ferryman comics? Read this now. The Uber.
The Hans concept, the Uber daemon, is fully explained there. The neurology of why I come to these conclusions, but also the science of why I'm making what seems to be a wild statement that this is a simulation or an instantation. Now, I know that a lot of people are writing about this, but there ain't many people doing the science of it. There ain't many people pointing out and saying, well, why do we believe it's mathematical? Why do we believe? And it's to do with black holes. It's to do with information and black holes. It's to do with how information disappears into a black hole. Now, according to the second law of thermodynamics, energy can only be transferred into another form of energy. It cannot be lost. Okay? In any enclosed system. Now, if the universe is an enclosed system, which it has to be, if it started 13.8 billion years ago as the Big Bang, which wasn't big and wasn't a bang, but we won't go into that, and spreading out, it's been spreading out for 13.8 billion years, which means the universe, effectively, we are inside a huge sphere. And the edge of it is the edge of the universe expanding out into who knows what. Because, of course, when people talk about the universe expanding, they don't misunderstand it. The universe is expanding everywhere. Space is expanding inside your brain. Everything is expanding. It's not as if it's expanding outwards. It's more complex than that. But so you're in this side of this big sphere and you're looking out. Now, if there's a black hole, they've discovered that information has density. It has mass. Recent research has shown this. So if I take my mobile phone with all the information and all the data and all the videos I've got on there and all the films and all my friends' details, and I drop it into a black hole, what happens to the information? It's energy. Energy cannot be lost. And Stephen Hawking came up with his concept of Hawking radiation and everything else. And he argued that what actually happens is all the information is copied. As it goes into the black hole, it's copied. And there's part of it to destroy, but the part, all the information itself, the digital information that encodes that is spread along the edge of the event horizon. Okay? Now, then the argument is that all stars that go into black holes and everything else, all that information is encoded, it's digitized. And I don't know how they did the mathematics of this. This is extraordinary. They calculated, again, just a bit of information. The smallest piece of area you can have is something called the Planck length.
Yeah.
Okay, which is a line. Now, in order to be an area, it has to be a Planck square, doesn't it? So it's like an area, so it's a square. That's the smallest piece of area. Now, what they said was, imagine that every Planck square dotted on the edge of the inner side of the universe, on the inner edge, contains one bit of information. Then calculate how many Planck squares there would be on the edge of a universe that's been expanding for 13.8 billion years. Then calculate how much information you would need, how many bits of information you'd need to encode the information to encode the universe. It's exactly the same figure. So they said, well, that's extraordinary. What's that telling us? Well, it's telling us it's a simulation. And I'll make, as one point I love making on this, that I don't know whether I'm right on this one, but don't you think it's weird that the sun is 800, I think it's 800 times bigger than the moon's disk as you see it. And it's 800 times further away. So when you have a full total eclipse, the moon can perfectly to a ridiculous amount covers the sun. And people watch these things and never think, hey, isn't that a clue that there's something going on here that we're not sure about? And I've discussed this with astronomers and they've said, well, no, it's just chance. What? It's chance? And then I point out and I say, do you know that the moon has been further away and closer to us over the time of humanity? That actual exact covering has only been for the last, I think, 15, 20,000 years. So we are sentient beings perceiving something and somehow creating it. And it seems to be that it's programmed, or it's now, again, pick up any research book. And I say to people, there is a very famous cover of Scientific American that came out about 2002. And the cover says, are we living in a hologram? This is Scientific American. This is not Woo Woo Weekly. This is Scientific American. And there's guys like Juan Maldacena, who is a Brazilian physicist, I think, and the late guy Jacob Bekenstein, who was a physicist, an Israeli physicist. They were doing the maths of this. They were doing the science of it. Now, get this, there is a guy called Craig Hogan at the Perimeter Institute in Ontario, in Canada. They are working out and trying to discover the pixelation of space. They believe that space is pixelated. Now, if space is pixelated, it means it's a simulation. And there was information, there was a machine called the GEO 6000 machine in northern Germany, who was looking for gravity waves. And again, they found something that they were not looking for. And I can't know the full science of this. I need to know, I need to read up more. But apparently there was something in those discovery that said, this suggests that it's a simulation. And Hogan and his team are trying to find the pixelation of space. Now, if space is pixelated, it means there's bits between it. It means it's not continual either. It means that space is quantized. And if space is quantized, space-time is quantized. And if space-time is quantized, time is quantized. And if time is quantized, it means 1 second doesn't link to another second, which means there are big gaps between time itself. So suddenly matter starts to dissolve into maths. And again, this is not Anthony Peake saying this. Pick up a book called The Mathematical Universe by Professor Max Tegmark. He does this.
Yes.
Now, Tegmark himself, and again, in the new book, I have a section in Tegmark's book, The Mathematical Universe, where he describes an incident that took place when he was a kid. And he was cycling through Copenhagen on his bike. And as he was cycling through, he knew that there wasn't much traffic, but he was coming to an intersection, and something in his head said, stop, don't go. So he slammed his brakes on as a juggernaut went past. And he said, I'd have been killed if I'd not slammed the brakes on, which made him then start to think, well, what made me slam the brakes on? How did something know that that was going to happen? And then he realized, and this is extraordinary, he realized that this is just his universe. And he died in other universes, but he can't die in his universe, because if he did, his universe would cease to exist. So then he started doing the physics of it. And again, guys, you'll love this. Just go on YouTube and just search out quantum suicide. I've cited this in my first book, and I cite it even greater in the new book. Tegmark shows, by applying quantum physics, and specifically the many worlds interpretation of quantum physics, and the collapse of the wave function and the observer effect, the idea that by observing it, we collapse a statistical wave function into a point particle, you can prove we're all immortal. We live forever within our own worldview. But what Tegmark doesn't explain is, what is that worldview? I do it. I say it's a simulation. It's an instantation. We're all living in an instantation, and all of our instantations come together in what I call the egregorial hypothesis. Our universe is an egregore. It's a thought form. It's a tulpa. We are creating this. And you, all three of us now, because we are sharing this reality, we're like co-creating this bit of reality that we're sharing. And we walk away, and that wave function collapses, and a new one is created next time you interface with somebody else. Everybody else is real, but they're all existing within their own. And this is where you go when you have out of the body experiences. This is where you go when you go astral traveling. These are the places you go. You are going into another reality. I have friends of mine who astral travel, and they meet people in astral travel that they've met before. They go to the same places. I've got one friend who's mapping his old school out in his out-of-body experiences. This is the real deal. So here suddenly I've explained out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, ghosts. You know, what am I not explaining here? And the world still goes, who's Anthony Peake? Who's this guy? Never heard of him.
It's mind-blowing. So much information that it's just, wow, it's incredible stuff. I want to bring in Paul now, if you want to, because I've not really brought in Paul yet. If there's anything that you've questioned for Anthony Peake. I know you've had.
Well, I'm just enjoying listening as well.
Amazing,
So it's amazing, it really is. But I'm just wondering about when we was on about near-death experiences just then as well. And I'm just wondering, when I had my near-death experience, was it like I almost had an agreement to maybe meet my daemon, because I had like light beings. It felt like I saw 3 light beings, and I just wondered what Anthony's version of that might have been. Is it that I agreed to meet daemons at that point?
Yeah, I think that what happens is there is what's called the virgin life, which is the first life you have, the first game that you live your life. So imagine, again, you're a game player, you're playing Tomb Raider, you switch it on, Lara Croft's on the screen. Lara Croft just realizes she's there, and she feels that she's motivated to walk, which is the game player making her walk. So your first life, you are literally a dyad, a unified being. The daemon and the eidolon are both the same being. You're both the same. You start to die in your first life. And when you start to die in the first life, and again, I try to do the science, or I try to do the phenomenology of this and the experiential of this, because this is what people report when they have near-death experiences, is that you start to feel you're splitting into 2 people. There's as if there's a new version of you that is breaking off, and you start to die. Now, what then happens is the new version of you, the new daemon, the daemon that realizes it's a daemon for the first time in its life, realizes that its eidolon is different, but it has to help its eidolon. And it thinks, oh God, my eidolon is dying. What do I do? And it realizes that what it has to do, it has metaphorically to press the fast forward button of the new life, the new game. So it does it and it starts the new game. But then it realizes and it goes, oh, hold on a minute. I'm not sure if he's actually going to die yet. So it leaps into your life and becomes manifest in your brain because it's part of your brain. Remember, Cheating the Ferryman, you haven't died. I don't need to explain how all these things happen in a dead brain because it isn't a dead brain. So that's one of the differences of my hypothesis to every other afterlife experience. You're still alive. You're living in smaller bits of time. So the daemon has to influence or talk or discuss things with the dying person. So what it will do, it will manifest itself in the most effective way to make the eidolon consciousness believe it. So if it needs to manifest as Great Aunt Doris, it will do so. If it needs to manifest as God or Jesus or Elvis Presley or children from school, because in a few weeks' time, I'm going to be interviewing one of the guys who's been researching child near-death experiences. And one of the mysteries of childhood near-death experiences is that many of the beings of light or the being of light these kids experience are not dead. They're school friends who are still alive. So how does that work? It works because it's the daemon pretending to be somebody else. So the daemon then turns round to you and will say things like, are you happy with your life? Have you lived your life well? I'm going to show you elements of your life. And you have panoramic life review. It takes you through your life super fast and it'll focus in on little bits of your life and say, do you remember this? But it does that fast. And what it will then do, it will then guide you and it will say things about you. And then it'll say, but I think you need to go back. This is not your time. You need to go back. And what you'll do is you go back again. But people think you go back and you'll come to. The reason being that the daemon literally realizes you're not going to die. So it fast forwards. It presses the metaphorical fast forward, which is my life flash before my eyes. It's one of the Moody traits. It's one of the Grayson traits within near-death experience. This is what clinicians use to describe the near-death experience. Panoramic life review. Literally, it's literally fast forwarding your life, the recording, the part of your life that you've just lived that is within the simulation. Okay, so then you bounce back in your body again and you're going, what the hell was that? You know, I went somewhere else. I met these beings or being, and they spoke to me. Now, again, the parallels between near-death experiences and DMT experiences are extraordinary. You know, they are very, very similar. And I work with DMT researchers. I'm working with, at the moment, some of the guys that are doing research at Imperial College in DMT. You know, they're actually testing out. So there's similarities here. You know, there's the beings of light that people see. There's so many shamanic elements here as well. So then you're catapulted back. But when you go back, a little bit of the daemon is with you. And this is why when people have near-death experiences, my friend Penny Satori wrote a book called the life-changing or the something of near-death experiences. Because when people have near-death experiences, they come back and they see the world in a different way. They are more spiritual. They are more open to ideas. They're more secure about whether they're going to die or not. But I'd also argue that the problem is the doors of perception. In my book, Opening the Doors of Perception, I discuss this in greater detail. But the doors of perception have been opened more. So you're more open to your demonic consciousness. So you're going to have more precognitions. Because, of course, you will, because the daemon has lived your life before. And in its mindsets, that it knows your future. And sometimes they bleed over. So that's why people become precognitive. This is why the way the world changes. And then at the end of that life, you come to the end again, and then you die again. And this time the daemon knows what it has to do. Because for most people, we don't have a near-death experience. This doesn't happen, but for you, it did. So the daemon then has to go, oh, it's right, I'll bounce them back to the start again. And you go back to your start of your life again, and again, then it starts again. And then the daemon's whispering in your ear. It's your guide, it's your spirit guide. And it's saying, you know what you should do, Paul, this time? You should do this. Now, remember, and this is so important, the simulation, the instantation, doesn't just contain the outcome of all the decisions you can make. It contains the outcomes of all the decisions that everybody makes, which means that all the decisions made by your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, it means that you could exist in a completely different universe. You could exist in a universe where there's a cure found for certain diseases that people in this life have suffered from, that in the next life you won't. Because people turn around to me and say, but if you're reborn as yourself in your life, it means that all the illnesses you have will still be with you. Well, no, you could be born in a universe where that illness doesn't exist. So in which case you've got to be a different life in a completely different way. And suddenly this is incredibly liberating to people, because suddenly it's, wow, I can live myself life again. I can put right all the wrongs I did last time. I can try and put right the mistakes I made. And I can explore all those avenues that I didn't follow last time. But I can also say I'm sorry to the people I treated badly last time. Remember, for instance, in Connors, in Groundhog Day, he's running around the town trying to save people. Imagine what you could do is that time you hurt that girl and you broke her heart. You could stop that happening by either not starting the relationship or staying with her, but you can stop the pain of other people. You can make yourself progress. And I argue after many of lives of this, you become what the Buddhists call a bodhisattva. It's an enlightened being. You become, after you've lived the perfect life, you're then allowed to move on. You're then allowed to die. Remember, all these lives happen in the split second before you die. Then you move on. Now, of course, there'll be Buddhists out there who'll be going, you know what he's talking about here? It's the bardo state. It's exactly what I'm talking about. It is exactly the bardo state. You're in the bardo state, and then you're reborn. Now, it could be then you could be reborn and reincarnation may happen, or you may go to heaven and see Jesus, or you may do a myriad of things. You may do all the things that your belief system tells you is true. Because if reality is an egregore and it's been created by us, it means that your beliefs create the world as well. I argue when people see UFOs, it's because they're anticipating them. It's what they want to see, but they're real. When people see the Virgin Mary, when they saw the Virgin Mary at Fatima, thousands of people saw the Virgin Mary. They saw the sun spin in the sky. It was a collective hallucination, but nobody knows what a collective hallucination is, because that implies telepathy between thousands of people. You know, as you know, if definition of hallucination is something you see that nobody else sees, that's an hallucination. If you and somebody else say the same thing, they call it a folie à deux. So they say, we've explained it, we've called it a folie à deux, nice foreign phrase. Better if it had been Latin or Greek, that was even more impressive. But the point of fact is, if a folie à deux is true, it suggests telepathy. So the person who ordinarily would deny the existence of telepathy is happy to use telepathy to explain something else he can't explain, which is even more embarrassing, which is collective hallucinations. And again, in one of my books, I discuss hallucinations in great detail, the nature of hallucinations, exactly what they are. This is an hallucination in exactly the same way. There is no difference. People who take DMT tell me that the DMT world is far more real than this. They come back here, hey man, this is the hallucination. How do you know? How do you know anything? How do you know the color red? The color red does not exist. It's a qualia. No colors exist. No feelings exist. I mean, people turn around to me and say, I can bang the table. You know, and there was a famous the guy that wrote the dictionary, Dr. Johnson. Dr. Johnson, when he was walking with Boswell, Boswell describes this. Boswell was his friend, and they were walking in Scotland, and they were discussing the theories of Bishop Berkeley, or Berkeley. And Berkeley argued that nothing is real, it's all emanations of the mind. Okay, and he's walking around, and this is typical of how people don't think any deeper. And he's walking around and he said, oh, it's nonsense, these ideas of Berkeley. And he kicked a stone and he said, I refute it thus. And he kicked a stone. And it's called refudum or ab lapidum, you know, to something by disproving by the stone. Think about this for a second. He claimed he proved that reality was right by kicking a stone. Okay, a stone is made up of atoms, molecules and atoms. The atoms in there are 99.999999999999996 empty space. What is actually physically in there are the quarks and the electrons, both of which are point particles, which means they have no extension in space. So suddenly the stone disappears. The stone isn't there. There is no physical anything there other than quarks. And there are 6 of them, and they're all point particles and electrons. Okay, so he kicks the stone. What did he really feel in his toe? Well, he never actually touched the stone, because the outside of every atom has electrons whizzing round, and electrons are negative. The atoms in your toe are also made of atoms, and the edge of those atoms also are made of electrons, which are negatively charged. Now, do you remember from schoolboy physics, if you have a negative charge and a negative charge, what happens?
It kind of,
it pulls apart, doesn't it?
Doesn't it? Yeah, it pushes apart.
Pushes it apart like the positive sides of a magnet. They never, ever touch.
Mm.
This is what happens when we think we touch things. The edge of your fingers when you touch a table or a chair or your loved one, the edge of your finger is hovering above. It's called electrostatic repulsion, which means you never touch anything. You never touch anything. You never feel anything. You don't see anything. What you're seeing is your brain reconfigurating electromagnetic energy that has hit the retina of the eye and has been confirmed, changed into electrical impulses. What we think is out there is not. And indeed, the people who believe it is are actually known as naive realists. This is by people, scientists who actually research perception. So suddenly, according to my hypothesis, suddenly everything suddenly disappeared. Suddenly you're assured of everything. And the egregorial hypothesis suggests that we're co-creating this.
Well, say with our eyes, we can only see between ultraviolet and infrared, and that's
again, in one of my books, I'd use the analogy of that, and I said,
"Oh, you do, the river,
the river, it's the you take the Mississippi River, and it starts in a tiny lake up in Minnesota, and it winds down through the center of the United States till it comes out in the Gulf of Mexico. Now imagine that river is the full electromagnetic spectrum. That is from gamma rays to radio waves, okay? And that's the electromagnetic spectrum. What we believe is the whole world, and the visual world we think is real, is 1.5 inches, 8 miles south of Hannibal, Missouri. That's it. And I call this electromagnetic chauvinism. The idea that we think that because of our perspective is the right perspective. An owl sees the world very differently. A bat sees the world very differently. It was John Searle, I think, wrote a book, a paper called What It's Like to Be a Bat. You know, the idea is we think that this is it because this is how we see it. It's the same with time perception. We see reality in bits of 1/24 of a second. That's the critical fusion facility of the eye. It could be a minute, it could be an hour, it could be a year. So that creature sees the world in a completely different way. But is it more accurate than ours? Of course it isn't. So it's when you start thinking about these things deeper, and I always argue this, that most people don't think at all about these things. Then you get intelligent people and scientists who think to this level, the Brian Coxes of this world, who think down to this level. And then there's this other level that I go to where I say, no, hold on a minute. Let's go further. Let's not just stop at the materialist reductionist world. Let's see what the evidence is telling us. Don't look where I'm pointing. look what I'm pointing at,
Yes.
you know, is the diktat, really.
Well, I'm just checking time. If we're coming up to time, it's been absolutely fascinating. I mean, we've got loads of questions, so we'd love to have you back again.
Well, let's do it again. Maybe we can do it again. Maybe next month. You know, if you know, we've just scratched the surface,
yes,
and I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that really. And I know people have messaged me today saying, "Is there any way that I can send in questions?" So if the people watching this program now want to ask me questions, message Jonny and Paul.
Yeah.
And then next time I'm on, we can discuss them.
We'll have a 4-hour show.
And we will do another hour and a half, you know. That's not a problem. I mean, I'm more than happy. I do tend to, once I get on a flow, I tend to not stop, you know, and it's sometimes.
Well, we'd never want to stop because it's amazing. It blows our minds. It just, for me personally, I can't wait to dig into the book now. But just before we finish, if you just give a you know, what's happening in Anthony Peake's world, any projects you're going to do in the future?
Yeah, let's say next February I think it's the 8th or the 9th, but it's up on my Facebook wall. It's up on various places, and it's up on my YouTube channel. But I'll be discussing this book at Watkins Bookshop in the centre of London, and it will start at 5:15. I'm also going to be in London for most of the day. And if anybody wants to meet up with me, just let me know, because there's going to be a lot of people coming down from a lot of places, and we're going to make a day of it. So there's going to be lots of people. We're going to be meeting up. We're going to be having coffee. We're going to be doing things like this all day. And then I'll do the talk. Also, I will be in the first weekend of June. I'll be in California, in Indian Wells, where I'll be speaking at Contact in the Desert. And in the Contact in the Desert, I'll be doing a lecture. And I've yet to decide the topic of that. It could be the egregorial hypothesis, or it could be on Philip K. Dick. I'm not quite sure yet. I'm not sure which one they want yet. Then I'll be doing a workshop, where I'll be doing a workshop about the daemon, how to communicate with your daemon, what processes, what neurological processes can be used, what hypnotic techniques can be used. Then the next day, on the Monday, which is the day after, but the event continues, I'll be doing an intensive. And the intensive will, I think, be 2 or 3 hours, and I'll be doing the science. I'll be equipping people to really understand what quantum mechanics and cosmology is really about. So when people use terms like Schrodinger's cat, what do we really mean by Schrodinger's cat? I'll take it right back to basics to explain it by analogies and everything else as to what quantum physics is telling us. So by the end of that, you'll be able to engage with any scientist. And believe me, they will not be able to respond effectively. The only thing they can say is, oh, you don't understand the maths, which is what they always do. You know, it's one of those things, really. So that's the main things. Also, I'm also doing a series of my own consciousness hours over the next few weeks. Again, the details are on my site for that. My website is anthonypeake.com. I'm very active on Instagram. I'm very active on Facebook. In fact, too active on Facebook. I post far too much on Facebook and Instagram, to be honest. So when an idea comes to me, I just regurgitate it. It's what I'm like. So anyway, so thanks everybody for listening. And guys, Jonny and Paul, thank you very much. I think the last time we met was 1919 at the event in Birmingham, I think.
Yes, I think it was. Yes, that's blimey. That's quite a while away as well.
It is. Just goes to show, doesn't it? Just goes to show.
Yeah.
But anybody as well, you know, people need to check out the interviews we did here.
Oh, they were great. Yeah.
There's 2 or 3 of them, aren't they? And they're extraordinarily good. They're really, really good. And thank you guys for that. Right. Okay. Thank you very much. And thanks everybody for listening in. Oh, do you want to talk about a little bit about your website and your work?
Well, really just that we'll be publishing an edited version on United Planet YouTube channel and BitChute and Rumble. We're having a bit of trouble with BitChute, so I think we're going to probably move more onto Rumble, but definitely YouTube, Rumble, and we'll have there the links as well. Anyone who is new to Anthony Peake from United Planet, I think most people now with United Planet are aware of Anthony Peake, but there may be new people coming in that aren't aware. We'll have the links at the bottom to the website to have all the details, and I think that's about it, really. Yes. So
wonderful. Okay, Jonny and Paul, fantastic. That was really, really good. And I hope that people listening in found it interesting and didn't think, oh my God, it's Anthony Peake droning on and on and on again. Sorry about that. I'm just one of nature's enthusiasts. It's not meant.
Fantastic.
It's not
loved
meant.
it.
Right.
It's been amazing.
Okay, then. Wonderful. Thanks, guys. I'm now going to thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thanks everybody else for listening in.